Hey, and welcome back to Felony Spectator. Thanks for joining me again. Today's episode is kind of wild, so make yourself comfortable and be warned it gets graphic. Don't watch this around your kids, especially the last half. So who are we talking about? Today we're talking about Matthew Hoffman. He was found guilty of murdering 3 people and also found guilty of holding 13-year-old Sarah Maynard hostage in his house of leaves. That's right, his house of leaves. Sarah Maynard actually wrote a book about the whole situation and how she survived, and that's really what got me interested in this case. The house isn't actually made of leaves, but you'll see what I mean. So let's just get in. Matthew Hoffman is the son of Robert and Patricia Hoffman. He grew up in the Warren area of Ohio and would end up living solely with his mother in 1997 when his parents got divorced. He attended East Knox High School and studied industrial electricity at Knox County Career Center after high school graduation. He did get into a little trouble as a kid, like going onto the roof of the school with friends, but nothing major he got arrested for as a juvenile. But as he got a little bit older, a childhood neighbor would say that as a kid, Matthew always seemed kind of lost or sad, just generally unhappy. And other people would describe Matthew as weird or strange. He didn't really have a lot of friends due to his awkward sort of personality, so he was more of a loner. Even as an adult, he didn't really grow out of that awkwardness that made him weird. He liked to be alone and spend time sleeping outdoors in the woods. Now, not like your traditional camping, more like just taking a few things, a sleeping bag, and just sleeping outside. A friend of Matthew's would go on to say that prior to buying his home in 2010, Matthew camped out for 2 months in the woods. And this friend would also say that he just thought Matthew was strange because he spent some time in jail before moving to Apple Valley. Back in year 2000, Matthew was living in Colorado at a ski resort town called Steamboat Springs, and this is where his grandma lived. He worked there as a plumber's helper and often worked alone when he was sent to easy jobs. His former boss would say that Matthew maybe seemed a little strange, but he was mostly just quiet. So while in Steamboat Springs, Matthew lived in D-Bar K Motel, and that motel was mostly filled with transients or lower-income residents. But one day, he decided to live in one of his clients' condos while it was unoccupied. Matthew had been sent to the Ridge condo, Unit 7, to install a garbage disposal, and he ended up coming back knowing that they were going to be away for a while. The owner of the condo was actually living in Illinois at the time. So he would sleep in their bed, watch their TV, he used the jacuzzi, he just generally hung out at the condo and eventually took some of their belongings before completely torching the entire building. He wanted to ruin any evidence or fingerprints he may have left behind. So in the middle of the night, Matthew would bring 2 gas cans to the condo, saturating everything before he lit the entire place on fire. Around 3 a.m., the condo would go very quickly up into flames, with other residents still sleeping inside their units. Thankfully, everyone got out safely and nobody was injured, but there would be over $2 million in damages, and about 16 people had to evacuate the building in the middle of the night with nothing but their pajamas. Fire investigators knew that the fire was suspicious. Unit 7 was known to be unoccupied at the time, and the fire started with an accelerant. So after speaking with the unit owner of number 7, they learned that the last person who entered the unit recently was a plumber who was doing some recent work on it. The plumbing company would give them Matthew Hoffman's name and address, and also saying that he hadn't actually shown up to work for the past few weeks either. Upon entering Matthew's apartment, police would then find one very large sign leaning up against the wall, and obvious evidence that the occupant was no longer there. The sign would be a carved wooden highway sign saying, "Welcome to Steamboat Springs." And they would also find 2 more under the building. And these signs apparently were worth over $5,000 each. The city of Steamboat Springs had reported their highway signs missing and were baffled as to why anyone would want to take them. Well, Matthew had allegedly stolen his friend's truck and then took the signs and returned the truck without his friend even knowing. And apparently he did this for a souvenir. But we do later learn that he actually likes going into people's homes and stealing, so he's a little bit of a kleptomaniac. Matthew would be apprehended, and while being questioned about the signs, he did admit to the arson. He got sentenced to 8 years in prison, but he only served 6 on good behavior. He would be very apologetic, saying that he learned his lesson and he was very sorry and he put so many people in danger. And inmates would also go on to say that he was just a nice guy, he did his time, and he didn't cause any trouble while he was there. They just assumed he was a young guy who made a mistake and they'd never hear from him again. So after Matthew got released, he returned to Ohio in 2007. He would live with his mom for a while, and by 2009, he would buy his own home in Mount Vernon in central Ohio. So things were looking good for Matthew. He was making friends, he had a girlfriend who moved into his house with him with her young son, and neighbors really initially liked Matthew as well. His girlfriend's son would often be seen playing outside with the neighborhood kids. His next-door neighbor, Donna Davis, or Davies, I don't know how you say her last name, Davis, we'll say, she had 3 kids, and she would let her son go over to his house to watch movies, play in the yard, throw a football around, and even let the boys have sleepovers at Hoffman's house. And Hoffman also helped Donna out by picking up her daughter from the movies. After a little while, by the end of summer 2010, Donna would say that things started to change. Matthew became grumpier, his friendly personality disappeared, and his girlfriend would come outside less and less to talk. Donna thought that perhaps his girlfriend was sneaking out to come out and chat, and her behavior kind of changed as well. Donna's daughter also said that on one of their rides home from the movies, he took her down some quiet side streets that were out of the way from their main route, which made her very uneasy. Donna would then limit her daughter's time at the Hoffmans, and eventually she cut all ties off altogether. Within a few months, Matthew and his girlfriend broke up, and she moved herself and her son out of the home. Matthew had also lost his new part-time job as a tree trimmer. His previous manager at Fast Eddie's Lawn Care said that he worked part-time for about 3 weeks, but was let go because of his performance. He was apparently quiet and unassuming, nothing that would indicate that he was dangerous, but coworkers said that he was very odd, and not really someone that they wanted representing the company. And he also didn't disclose that he went to prison. So by the end of October 2010, he was let go. Donna would also go on to say that after Hoffman's girlfriend moved out, he also cut electricity to the house, which baffled her because winter in Ohio is pretty cold. She would see squirrel traps in the yard for him to catch and eat squirrels, and he would also climb in the trees and just stare at people for hours in the neighborhood. She actually stopped allowing her kids to go outside to play altogether if he was outside because he just made her so uncomfortable. His ex-girlfriend would also claim that when she came back to the house to grab the remainder of her belongings, they got into a really heated argument and he began to choke her. They would tumble over a chair and he would use his forearm to pin against her neck, and he would continue to choke her on and off until he finally allowed her to leave. She did call the police and report this incident, but she later decided not to press charges. And it's not said why, but I could only imagine it's because she probably didn't want to ever see him again or deal with him again, so she just moved on. And not long after, maybe 2 weeks after his girlfriend moved out, he decided to plan another robbery. Because apparently doing 6 years for the last one taught him nothing. He would claim that he randomly chose the house of Tina Herman because he noticed that her garage door didn't close properly, and it was in a more private area. Tina Herman was the loving mother of 2. Her ex-husband Larry, who she had a good relationship with, said that everybody loved Tina. She would light up a room and was just generally really, really happy. Tina and Larry had 2 kids together, Sarah and Cody, which they shared custody of until he had to move away for employment. He had gotten remarried and had a son with his new wife, and he needed to provide for them. So when he got a job offer, he decided to make the hard decision to move away from Sarah and Cody. Tina was living with her kids and a man named Greg, who was a long-term boyfriend. They were in the middle of separating amicably, but they were still living together while Tina found herself a new place to live. When they moved into that home years earlier, Tina loved it. It was down a quiet street across from a wooded area, and it was very peaceful, private, and she just thought it was great for the kids. She never felt unsafe living there and was just really proud of her home. She had also become really good friends with a neighbor who lived down the street named Stephanie Sprang. Stephanie had also 3 kids of her own, and people would describe the 2 women as best friends. They often had each other over for visits and wine and anything that good friends do. So Tina and Stephanie were planning on looking for an apartment for Tina or even a home for her to rent in that very neighborhood because she loved it so much. Tina worked at the local Dairy Queen and she loved her job. She liked her coworkers and she was always happy and loved coming to work, and they all enjoyed working with her as well. And her kids were amazing. She had a great friend, Stephanie, and life was just good. On the morning of November 9th, 2010, Matthew had spent the night outside hiding in the wooded area across the street from Tina's home. He had decided that her house was the house that he was going to break into. So he packed a sleeping bag, snacks, water, and he decided to wait for everyone to be gone before he let himself in through the broken garage door. Greg had left for work that day at 3 a.m., and he went to his job at the Target distribution center, and he didn't return home for a few days, as he had planned to spend the next night at a friend's house and go golfing on his day off. After seeing Greg leave, Hoffman would go back to sleep for a little bit. Tina would then drive away in her truck mid-morning, and the kids had also already gone off to school, so he made his move and snuck inside their quiet home. Hoffman admitted that he felt excited to be in someone else's home while they were away. He enjoyed looking through the people's belongings, touching everything, and figuring things out. And Hoffman would be in the house for a few hours, which isn't usual for a B&E. Most people go in fast, they take what they need, and they get out. But Hoffman would be exploring for some time. He claimed he was looking for things that were easy to carry without being seen, but he couldn't find anything of value, which would be a lie, because they had iPads, laptops, cameras, lots of stuff that he could have easily carried out. Tina would return home after running errands most of the morning, and Hoffman would still be in the house. Hoffman claimed that he didn't want to hurt anyone, and he was just there to take some things, but when he heard that someone returned home, he ran and hid in a back bedroom. Tina would put the groceries down in the kitchen and would then go into her bedroom where Hoffman would pull a knife on her. Hoffman would go on to say, "I hit her a couple times in the head, but this would not knock her out. It was not doing the job, and I started panicking." Tina's friend Stephanie Sprang would walk in and start screaming. Hoffman would then stab Tina 2 times in the back and claim to chase Stephanie out of the bedroom before stabbing her in the chest. Friends of Stephanie's believed that she wouldn't have run, and they thought that she would have fought Matthew or tried to help her friend, which would make sense because he stabbed her in the front and not the back, so she was facing him. Hoffman would then later claim to be in utter shock. He would wander and pace around the house, slowly realizing what he had done. And during this time, he would also kill the dog because it would not stop barking, and he needed to think of what to do. Hoffman decided it was best to dismember the women's bodies and destroy any evidence that was in the house. So he dragged the women into the bathroom and went to work. While Hoffman was mid-mutilation, the kids would return home from school and the house was quiet. So when they walked in, the dog didn't greet them, nor did their mother say hi when the kids got home, which is something that she usually always did. And Cody was about to remove his shoes when they'd see Hoffman running towards them with a knife. And Cody tried to run out the front door, but Hoffman would get him first. According to coroner's reports, he was stabbed once in the back of the head. And Sarah ran into her bedroom and hid there. Unfortunately, Cody would see the same fate as his mother and Stephanie. Hoffman claimed that he went in the bedroom to kill Sarah too, but he couldn't explain why he didn't kill her. He just couldn't bring himself to killing Sarah. So instead, he tied her up, put a pillowcase on her head, and put her in the kitchen. He would then finish processing Tina, Stephanie, Cody, and the dog, and Sarah would lay on the floor in the kitchen listening to strange sounds coming from the bathroom above her for hours. Thumping and grunting and the toilet flushing constantly. Hoffman would then load Sarah into Stephanie's Jeep along with several garbage bags. Sarah would say that she didn't know what was in the garbage bags at the time, but there was a lot of them. They would drive for a little bit before Hoffman would then leave Sarah in the Jeep for what seemed like hours, taking all the garbage bags with him. Hoffman would return and then take Sarah to his Yaris and brought Sarah back to his house. And because of the constant stopping and switching vehicles, Sarah wasn't sure if there was another person involved. Hoffman threatened that there was, and she wasn't really sure what to believe. Sarah would first be tied up in the bathroom, and she would see all kinds of strange doodles on the walls and a weird face drawn around the faucet at the sink. And she would also see hundreds of leaf bags piled all up around the room. And she asked him what it was about, and he just told her insulation. And Sarah at this point was now in survival mode, and she decided to actually compliment Matthew on his drawings. He would tie her up, leaving her on the floor, and left the house, telling her that someone was outside and would kill her if she tried to escape. And Sarah wanted to live, so she did what she was told and stayed on the cold bathroom floor. When he returned, he brought Sarah to his cold, dark basement. Hoffman had a makeshift bed in the basement for her, made out of leaves and blankets. And there were no windows in the basement, and Sarah would eventually lose track of time while being confined to this weird leaf bed. Hoffman told investigators that he thought Sarah liked the bed, and it was extremely comfy, and he himself had even wanted to sleep on it, and sometimes he did, with his arm around Sarah. Sarah would say that the bed was better than the bathroom floor, but it was dark and creepy and in the basement, and sometimes Hoffman would come downstairs and just stare at her and not speak. And then he'd go back upstairs, and she wasn't really sure what to think of him. She just still didn't want to upset him, so she just tried to sleep most of the time. She never yelled or screamed for help. Hoffman didn't actually see himself as someone who was holding Sarah hostage. It's believed that he thought Sarah was enjoying her time with him. He claimed that they played video games and watched movies together, Treasure Island, Iron Man, and he made burgers, which he also thought she enjoyed. He would say that sometimes Sarah wet herself, so he washed her clothes and let her have a shower. Sadly for Sarah, Hoffman also raped her several times while she was trapped in his basement. And while Sarah was being held hostage, the rest of her family was also reported missing. When Tina Herman failed to show up for work at her job at Dairy Queen November 11th, her manager would call the police because nobody could get a hold of Tina. She wasn't answering her phone, and they didn't know where she was. An officer would drive by the house during the day and notice that the driveway was empty, but nothing looked unusual, so he just drove on. He would return later in the evening, and Tina's truck would now be back in the driveway, and the lights were on in the house. So again, he assumed that she was home and things were fine, so he didn't stop. Tina failed to come to work again the next day, so this time her manager went to Tina's home to check for herself. Nobody answered the door when she knocked, so she went to the back of the house and broke through a window and saw the scene. She immediately called authorities. Police would find large amounts of blood all over the home. There would be a large saturation in the front room, a large saturation in the master bedroom, another large saturation in what they believed to be Sarah's room, and blood marks throughout the hallways that appeared to be drag marks, blood throughout the master bathroom, the shower, the sink, the floor, the bathtub. And they would also find patches of oil and bleach that someone had poured over the blood. It appeared that the attacker was trying to clean up somewhat before finally giving up. There was also shoe prints as well, walking through these puddles of blood and oil. A pair of gloves was left in the bathroom sink, as well as a bottle of bleach in the bathroom as well. A Jeep Cherokee was parked in the garage, and it had various types of weeds in the grill, as well as blood stains inside. It was later discovered that that Jeep belonged to Stephanie Sprang, Tina's best friend and neighbor. She also had not been seen for the last 2 days, and police would then learn that the kids also had missed school. At that point, detectives decided to do a full-scale missing persons investigation to find Tina, her son Cody, and her daughter Sarah, and her friend Stephanie. Detectives were fearing the worst. No activity had shown up on the women's credit cards or cell phones, and with the amount of blood in the house, it was very unnerving.
It's an unusual amount. It isn't from someone stubbing their toe or cutting their finger, peeling an apple or something like that.
They did, however, find a child-sized shoe print in the garage of an Airwalk boot. The shoebox of that boot was found in Sarah's closet, so they were really hopeful that they would find her alive. The day after the murders, police found Tina's truck abandoned near Keaton College campus with empty gas cans in the back. Strangely, deputies would also see a man loitering in a Yaris in the parking lot nearby. Police would ask the stranger who he was, and Hoffman would show him his driver's license and tell them that he was just there waiting for his girlfriend, Sarah. He didn't know her last name because it was just a new relationship. So police would let Hoffman go, but they did make a note of it with dispatch. Hoffman had actually driven Tina's truck to get the gas cans filled up with gas, but it had transmission problems. So his plan was to also burn Tina's house down to destroy all of the evidence left behind. So when the truck was breaking down, he decided to park it in the lot of the Keaton campus, and he walked all the way back to his house defeated. He would sleep there for a little while, but decided to go back in his Prius for the gas cans so he could finish the job. And this is when police saw him parked beside Tina's truck. So after speaking with police, Hoffman would go back home and have a bonfire in his backyard where he burnt his clothes and shoes from the incident, hoping that that would be enough. Hoffman would forget a Walmart bag that he left in the garage with a receipt that contained tarps and a new roll of heavy-duty garbage bags that were different from the garbage bags in the rest of the home. Detectives would find this and requested Walmart to search their store records for these purchased items. The customer who purchased these items was of medium build, dark-haired Caucasian, and he drove away in a silver Toyota Yaris. Detectives would search their motor vehicle database and locate all the Yaris owners in town, and they were able to identify Matthew Hoffman as he wore the same camouflage shirt in his license as he did in the video at Walmart. Once they did more investigating into Matthew Hoffman, his name would also pop up in the dispatch logs as they located Tina's truck as the man who was loitering around waiting for Sarah. They finally had their suspect. Police would then quickly get a no-knock warrant for Hoffman in connection to the disappearance of Tina, Cody, Stephanie, and Sarah, and they would go to his house to bring him in for questioning. SWAT officers would burst through Hoffman's home, throwing in flashbangs to disorient and stun Hoffman while he was sleeping on the couch. While officers were in Hoffman's house, they would see that a room to the right of the front door was covered in leaves about 3 feet deep. And it was worrisome because they didn't know if someone was hiding in the leaves or if there was bodies in the leaves. It just wasn't something that they had ever seen before. They would also find 3 floor-to-ceiling rows of bag leaves hanging from the living room wall. The bathroom was also completely insulated with more than 110 bags of leaves attached to the walls and surrounding the toilet. They would slowly walk around through the home and find that Sarah was thankfully alive in the basement. When police found her, she was wearing a white garbage bag with holes cut out for her legs. And this bag would sort of resemble like a makeshift adult diaper. She still had her jeans on, but they were wet from the waist to the knees because she urinated on herself from not being allowed to use the toilet. Her arms and legs were bound with rope. And Hoffman had gagged her as well, but he also confided in her saying that she could be released by Christmas. Thankfully, nobody had to wait that long. Sarah would deny that Hoffman ever cooked for her or allowed her to play games or watch movies. She would recall that once he gave her a bowl of cereal with curdled milk, and she gagged some of that down, trying not to upset him, but she wasn't allowed to use the shower. She was denied food, basic hygiene, like the use of a toilet or a shower. Inside the home was also a pair of sure-fit gloves, the same style of gloves that were found in the sink at Tina Herman's home. They would also discover that Hoffman bought those gloves on November 8th, the day before the incident, and he also bought duct tape and ordered a knife he used a week before the incident. Inside Hoffman's freezer was 2 squirrels, red popsicles, and not much else. There were strange doodles on the walls of his home as well, and these sketches would be compared to what someone would find on a teenage girl's notebook. So there was a giant peace sign and stars and random names written on marker, and inside his white bathtub was a drawing of a giant jack-o'-lantern in black marker. Hoffman would remain fairly silent during his interrogation. Investigators weren't really able to get him to talk much at all, and the only thing he did worth noting was when he slammed his fists against his chest and signed like it was breaking something. So it kind of looked like he was gesturing heartbroken, but when questioned, he just put his head back down and didn't respond. It wasn't till November 16th that he finally opened up to Special Agent Joe Dietz. It wasn't being recorded when Hoffman would start talking, as they were using the restroom at the time, but he basically said that he had a nightmare and he was probably ready to talk, but he had a request. His request would be that he would write down his confession on paper and the detectives could read it. He would then run away and attempt to escape custody, and they would shoot him dead. They obviously said no, that they wouldn't agree to shoot him, so Hoffman remained silent for a few more days. He threatened to kill himself in jail because he said he could not live with what he had done, and he also didn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail being injected with Thorazine, a schizophrenic drug, and he called himself a monster. It would be another 2 days before Hoffman would finally tell detectives about a 60-foot hollow tree in a wildlife reserve near Fredericton.
As a result of information provided by Matthew Hoffman, the bodies were located in a wooded area, inside of garbage bags, in a hollow tree, off of Yankee Street, which is west of Fredericktown here in Knox County.
He had a rig and pulley system that he used to lift everyone inside this dead tree, and with his experience being a tree trimmer, it also helped him tremendously. He traded that information only to be spared the death penalty.
Own butt. That's what it's all about, Nancy. He was promised no death penalty if he would just lead authorities to the bodies of the 2 women and the young boy. That's what he did.
You are kidding me.
Because he had also decided he didn't want to die anymore. He also agreed to a detailed confession to his attorneys and pled guilty. So Matthew Hoffman was given a life sentence without parole. The community was understandably upset by this incident. Tina's coworkers missed her terribly, and they decided to donate $1 from the sales of blizzards during a short period of time to support Sarah and Stephanie Sprang's children, and they raised over $2,532. And nobody really knows why Matthew did this. Hoffman's lawyers really wanted the court to believe that it was random, but Hoffman had previously bought the gloves, duct tape, and knife a week before he went to the house. He also just hung out for hours without stealing anything. Why didn't he just rob the place and leave? Police also later learned that Matthew Hoffman was a member of the same gym Stephanie Sprang worked at as a part-time cleaner. A friend of Stephanie also claims that she and Tina went to a house on Columbus Road where Matthew lives, as Stephanie was supposed to clean a house there, but there was plumbing issues, so she couldn't. This friend also believes that Matthew and Tina connected on Facebook at some point. Also, back in 2009, Stephanie was doing odd jobs around the community for work, and her ex-husband put an addition onto Matthew Hoffman's house, and Stephanie did odds and ends there as well. Stephanie's ex also did some work on Matthew's mom's house, and Stephanie accompanied him as well there. And police believe this person to be credible, so there is a definite connection there. But Matthew insists it was a random burglary, but perhaps it wasn't. Authorities thought that Matthew was collecting leaves to use it as an accelerant and was actually planning on burning his own home down. I'm not sure we'll ever really learn the real reason for his behavior or why he chose to kill innocent people. I do have a hard time believing that he was suffering from a mental health episode, although I'm not a doctor, so I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. I also don't think this was an isolated incident. I'm sure that he broke into many, many other homes. I think his MO was probably breaking into homes, exploring, trying to leave undetected, but he obviously wasn't very good at that either. I would love to know your thoughts on this and what you think about it, because to me, it's so unusual. Like the whole situation with him collecting leaves. I did read that he had an obsession with trees, but I just find it hard to believe that his obsession went that sideways so quickly. Sarah is such a brave person as well, and she stayed so calm and did the right thing throughout her whole ordeal. Had she fought him or freaked out, this whole thing could have gone so much differently for her. She has shared her story with the help of an author and her father, and this book is called The Girl in the Leaves. And it was really eye-opening about the whole incident. There's lots more detail than what I covered here, so if you are interested in it, I definitely recommend if you want to learn more. Thank you again for joining me here at Felony Spectator. Please hit subscribe. I need more subscribers, and join me again for another true crime story next week. Thank you.